We're also doing one of the most interesting Q&As we've ever done on here. One of you asks, how do you just know how to do anything? How to move past feeling like sex is bad and having anxiety about it now that I'm married? Is it okay to be nervous about your first time when you do get married? Hey everybody, it is Kristen.
I'm Bethany.
Boom, 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 and we are the founders of Girl Define Ministry. So glad you're here. I love hanging out with y'all every week. This is the bomb. You may have heard we have a huge goal. It's kind of scary because it's a huge goal of reaching 500 patrons. Now, when we reach 500 patrons, we are doing one of the biggest giveaways that we have ever done, ever.
It's so exciting.
Girl Defined. It is so exciting. And so here's what's going to happen. From now until we reach 500 patrons, every single one of you that says, I want to get behind Girl Defined, bleh. I've been hearing about this. I want to do this. I want to get monthly freebies, Zoom calls, all the other fun stuff. And also, I want to support them and be a part of the cool patron family. It's like such a fun sisterhood. And as I join, you will get put into a drawing. When we reach 500 patrons, we are going to randomly pick 3 of our patrons to win the hugest Girl Defined. It's like a weekend getaway where
Ultimate
3 of you
weekend getaway.
The ultimate weekend getaway where we are going to fly 3 of you into San Antonio, round trip flights. We are going to put you up in a hotel. We are going to hang out with you. We are going to have activities. You are going to get a rental car, food, fun for an entire weekend with you and a friend. So if you win, you'll get a friend and there will be 2 other girls along with you. And it's going to be like the ultimate Girl Defined hangout time.
We're going to hang out with you like the entire weekend.
And
it's going to be
amazing.
I'm like
already so excited. So by joining, you will help us push that number closer to 500. And then when we reach 500, we are going to do the big announcement on who the winners are. So head on over for more details and to be a part of this super fun competition and get monthly freebies and support Girl Defined. It's like a win-win-win-win-win. Head on over to patreon.com/girldefined.
To enter, y'all, on top of that, we're also doing one of the most interesting Q&As we've ever done on here. So I posted over on Instagram at Girl Defined questions that you are too afraid to ask about sex. And actually on this week, we released a podcast where we did something else very interesting. We talked about, is it awkward to, is it awkward to be a virgin? This wasn't the exact name. Is it awkward to be a virgin on your wedding night? Like basically.
So it was like a 45-minute conversation talking all about like how to prepare for your honeymoon, how to not make it awkward, how resources, answering practical questions. So head on over to the podcast, The Girl Defined Show. We'll link it below because this is like
a good conversation.
One big conversation.
Yeah.
Okay, but before you dive in, can I just say that I'm so glad we're talking about these questions, and I'm so glad you asked them because I think sometimes we can view sex like, oh, it's kind of like a worldly thing, or I feel awkward, or, like, yeah, I can talk about sex, I have no problem. We can almost be crude and like disrespectful about sex in the way that we approach it, talk about it like in a worldly way, or we can be really shy and like scared of it. But we need to get to the word of God and look and see, okay, God designed sex. It's a beautiful thing. It's his invention. He has an intention and a purpose behind it. And so the fact that we have questions about it is good. Like, we need to get our questions answered. We need to understand more about God's heart and intention for it. And that sometimes that means we have like these really specific questions and we need to have a Christian, like a biblical worldview as we talk about them. So I'm so grateful you asked the questions, that you weren't too embarrassed, and that we can have a respectful and honorable conversation about a really important part of life.
Yeah, so important. And this is something that we love to talk about because it's like impacts all of us. And I love your questions. Okay, we're going to try to get through a lot of them because there are actually a lot of really good ones. So we'll do the best we can to give quick answers because we want as many questions to get answered as possible.
And I haven't seen any of these questions.
She
looked through some of them, and
I'm kind of picking them as I go. So they're both kind of new to both of us.
Let's do it.
A question first: is it okay to be nervous about your first time when you do get married?
That was our entire Girl Defined Show podcast episode.
We talked a lot about
that. Yeah, and I think in a nutshell, I think it is okay. Like, if you've never done it, think about it. If you were gonna speak on the stage for the very first time and you had a message you were so excited to share, would you be nervous? Yeah, you'd be like a little nervous. You'd be anticipating it. Your heart might beat a little faster, but you would know, like, yeah, I've never done this before, so this is gonna be a little bit like, I don't know exactly how this is gonna turn out. That's okay. So yeah, I know going into my wedding night, I had never had sex before. Like, yeah, there was a little bit of that, like, whoo, but it's like such a beautiful thing that, it turned out great. But I think that that's okay to be like, have a little bit of jitters.
Absolutely. I think so too. Okay. Another question. Is it super weird the wedding night if you wait till then? Like, is it super awkward? I think kind of like the nervous question, but is it awkward? Which we talked all about in the podcast. But just a quick little answer here would be, I think that when you are committing your life to someone and they're committing your life to you, if you prepare emotionally, mentally, and really seek to understand God's beautiful design for intimacy and sex, and you have open communication and you're willing to share like how you're feeling and what you're thinking, and you are going into marriage and into your honeymoon with a good perspective on sex, I think that is going to reduce your chances of it being awkward by a long shot. But if you just go into it like, okay, I'm not going to ever prepare, I'm not going to ever get mentorship or counsel in that area as I'm engaged, then yeah, you might run into some stuff because you chose to get zero wisdom. So find a godly woman who you can be open with, who you can be honest with, who can really help you practically, emotionally, mentally, physically. Like she can talk you through all the things. And I think that will really prepare you. And then it can be fun and you can have the jitters and it can be kind of like nervous, whatever. But it really doesn't have to be awkward if you prepare well. Okay.
Agreed.
Another question. Okay. There are a couple different questions like this. So like how to, like girls saying, many of them, like I have a really high sex drive. How do I manage that before getting married? So
yeah, I wrote a whole post actually. So go search girldefined.com, just search on our site, because I wrote a whole post on, I actually think I called it like, is it weird for a girl to have a really high sex drive? I think in our world, we often just view like, okay, men have really high sex drives and they're always the ones wanting sex and girls don't really want it. But sometimes like a woman can have a really high sex drive and have those longings. And I felt like maybe I fell in that category a little bit more. And so in my singleness, yes, it was really, really hard. And there are, sexual temptations and just like, like that feeling of like, God, why would you give me such a strong sex drive if I'm not married? Like it would be so much easier if you just took this away. And I know I felt that many times, and it sounds like many of you do too. I think it's just like anything. It's saying, yes, God, I know you've given this to me. This is really hard. Help me to make choices to not fuel it. Like Song of Solomon talks about, do not awaken love until the right time. Yeah. And I think sometimes with our high sex drive, we can fuel it and not even realize that we're making it harder for ourselves by reading really erotic books, watching movies that are very sensual, listening to music that's fueling a lot of sexual thoughts in our mind, not guarding what we look at, what we see, what we take in, and we can like fuel our sex drive all the time, like ramping it up, and then there's no way to express that sexual desire in a God-honoring way in that season. So I think that's a huge thing, is really evaluate, am I making it a lot harder by always like ramping up my sex drive? And then another thing is just to really view that like, okay, Lord, this is something that you haven't given me. You haven't given me marriage, so I can't express these sexual desires in a way that honors you in marriage. So Lord, help me to trust you with this, to like surrender this, to say, Lord, like I know this isn't the right timing, this is so hard, but like to be so prayerful about it. And I know that's something like that I would just pray every day, like, Lord, help me today, and just like fight the battle one day at a time.
Yeah. Great answer. Okay, another question. And I just want to say one of you said this, and I'm not sharing any names because this is kind of supposed to be like an anonymous, like a safe place for you to share your like really honest questions. And one of you said, thank you for this open invitation. You girls are a safe place to share. So refreshing. And I just really appreciate you all trusting us with your questions, because I know that this can feel kind of like an awkward or like embarrassing sometimes. Like, I don't want to ask this. Is anyone else asking this? But if you could see the questions, there are so many questions. We are like so many, and you all ask very similar questions. So just know that. One of you asks, how do you just know how to do anything? I'm so nervous to get married. Now, we, like with anything, we have to learn. Obviously, we have like a natural understanding of maybe how things will work, but depending on the family you grew up in, where you grew up, you may have like, maybe you had parents who were like, here, let me lay it out for you. Here's how it all works. Maybe you're like, I never got that talk, or I never got any information. I'm just kind of figuring it out on my own. But have hope knowing that there are a ton of great resources. And now, thankfully, we live in a day and age where we have amazing like Christians who are able to use their platform, whether it's social media or like just blogging or websites, and they offer so much great advice. I mean, just one of them is Authentic Intimacy. You can go check that out. Just look up Authentic Intimacy, and they have not only a ton of resources, but practical help too. A book we recommended in our podcast, which is one we would recommend if you are engaged and closer to getting married, but it's called Intended for Pleasure. And it's an amazing book that really unpacks just like practically understanding your body, understanding you and your soon-to-be husband, and then as you get married, like bringing this book even on your honeymoon, knowing how things work, how to go about this in a way that makes sense and have confidence in what you're doing. It gives you the terminology, the words to use, and I think that it's just so helpful and equipping. But I would definitely recommend going to Authentic Intimacy and just kind of browsing some of their articles and podcasts. And I think you'll find some stuff for yourself as a single girl that will, or if you're engaged, that will really help. But I think there's no reason to go into your honeymoon feeling like, wow, I have no idea what I'm doing.
Almost uneducated because there's so much fear in the unknown, right? Like, if you've never ever been taught anything from a physiological level, even spiritually, like what's God's design for this, like how do things work, then like, there is stuff you can figure out just naturally, but it is scary if you don't feel equipped. And so the more that you're equipped as you get closer to that point of being engaged and like, okay, I'm about to get married, and you really start equipping and educating and learning and growing, then I think you'll feel a lot more confident just in your understanding.
Yeah, totally. And a lot of you are asking questions like that, like, should you have a biology lesson before you get married?
Yes.
You know, definitely get equipped. And if you have like a godly older woman, you're like, wow, I actually really admire her. Maybe even someone who's like a nurse or a doctor. Maybe you have a godly older woman. Personally, I would recommend talking to a woman. That would probably be more comfortable. So if probably you have like
all around.
a woman, you know, like just like, oh, I know her, she's a nurse. Like they just have a great understanding of the body, and just be like, hey, like I'm engaged, I'm getting married. Like, can we talk? I think that would be super helpful.
Yeah.
Okay. Another question. How to move past feeling like sex is bad and having anxiety about it now that I'm married.
Oh, wow. Oh, I love that you're asking this. You know, this is one thing that I think in purity culture, and we've talked about this, is that when purity culture, and what I mean is like, okay, the movement in the 80s and the 90s, like true love waits and promise rings and things that were good, but the emphasis was so much on like safe sex for marriage, purity, that we forgot to carry over the message of, oh, sex is actually a beautiful thing, and God designed it to be this incredible passion-filled expression, celebration within a covenant marriage. Now let's equip our young people to understand this beautiful design so they're shooting for something, not just running away from something, right? And so I feel like we, with good intentions, those movements kind of left behind the positive message and left a lot of us on the other side of marriage struggling to fully embrace it, because for so many years it was like bad, don't, you know, check all the boxes of purity, and it was just like, and now I'm supposed to flip a switch when I get married and celebrate it, and it's awesome. Like, that's hard, and we get that, and I do think that was a problem. But now that you're on the other side and you're recognizing, like, I do have a perspective that's more negative, I'm struggling in this, I would say it is not too late to start growing in your understanding of God's beautiful design. I mean, reading the book of Song of Solomon alone shows you the passion. I would also highly recommend, like you did, Authentic Intimacy, because that's a ministry geared specifically toward equipping women in matters of sex and intimacy and sexuality, intimacy and sexuality. So like a lot of ministries are geared towards men or like marriages, but this is geared toward women.
For sure.
So there's so much on there that you will find so helpful as you grow in your understanding of God's design. And I think that will help fuel more excitement, more passion, more of a right perspective, even on the other side of marriage.
Totally. And there are a lot of questions about like, what's okay within the bedroom and within marriage. And because we have such a broad audience, and we have a lot of single girls watching and, you know, married girls, youngers, olders, we want to actually refer you to a post that was written by Dr. Julie Slattery, which we're just recommending like crazy because she's awesome. And she has a post literally called like, what's okay in the bedroom. And we're going to link it below so that you can go and look it up. And she does an amazing job of explaining like how to decide what is okay and what's not okay. And then honestly, go, if you've never done it, like read Song of Solomon. Go and read that book and try to understand like, wow, they're talking all about, you know, their relationship and their love and expressing it, and see like, do I even have that kind of perspective, or like, what is my perspective? So those would be two challenges for you. Read the post and then go kind of browse through Song of Solomon and see what the Bible has to say. Somewhat, you might be able to catch on to what they're talking about. Okay. Another question, and this is one that's kind of like practical, but a lot of people are asking it, so I feel like maybe we should address it. They want to know, does it hurt the first time? And that's kind of a medical question. We are not medical professionals, but so many of you are asking it that I think we should say something.
Well, I mean, I can only speak from personal experience. I think across the board, I think the answer is yes, it does hurt the first time, just because of our biology, the way God designed us. And now this is the first time if you've never had sex before, right? So like the very first time, not just on your wedding night. We know a lot of you have had sex before and you're like, man, I wish I hadn't done that, but how can I move forward? And that's a whole nother conversation. There's so much redemption and hope in the Lord. But yeah, there is typically a little bit of pain. It's not horrible. It's not like, oh, I need like medication, but there is some just with the physiological design of the way that our bodies go together. But then it doesn't continue to hurt moving forward, unless there's a problem. So don't be discouraged by, that. It's not anything that's going to be like, oh, like I can't bear this, but just like I would say like a little bit of maybe discomfort, and then you can move on, and in time it's very comfortable and very pleasurable.
Yeah. And I think it's different for everyone. Like I personally never had any pain. And I was experienced like a lot of like kind of like fear and anxiety, because I was like, is it gonna be terrible? So I would say try not to stress about that and view it as a journey. And just like anything, like getting a really awesome job takes hard work, like if you want to be like a professional sports player, it takes a lot of work. If you want to have an amazing intimate sex life within your marriage, like it takes effort and work to learn and to grow. And so as you're on that journey, like when you're engaged and then married, that book Intended for Pleasure, it actually gives you literally practical things you can do to try to help prepare, because there are things that you can do medically, physically to prepare to help like even try to reduce there being pain.
Right.
And so when you're engaged, there are a lot of practical exercises and things that you can do. So grab a copy of Intended for Pleasure if you're engaged and go to the section where it talks about like how to prepare as a woman for like having sex for the first time.
That's a good point.
And I won't go into all the practical things because you can find it there. And I think if you're, if you are in that stage, you should start preparing, because that's what I did, and I do think that's what helped it to me.
Obviously made a very big difference.
I
read that book too. I thought I was prepared.
I mean,
so I'm glad that we each had a little bit of a different experience, so that it's not like, oh, one way is the way, because I think you just go into it and you say, okay, Lord, help me just to enjoy this and to not be fearful, and whatever happens. And again, if it is painful, it's not going to be so bad that it's like,
Well, and one thing I would say, because I have talked to other married women they didn't want to talk about how it felt for them with their new husband. And so instead of expressing and communicating, they just like were silent and were in discomfort. And then eventually, like you said, it does kind of resolve itself just with the way our bodies stretch and all of that.
Stretch and kind of heal.
But I would encourage you, please start your intimate real marriage off with good communication.
Yes.
Don't be silent and just keep it to yourself. Express it, because you're learning together, and that's beautiful. Okay, let's do one more, and then I know we could talk about this all day. Okay. This is a great question to end on. Is it embarrassing? Do you feel self-conscious? So we can each say a little something about that, and then we might have to do a part 2 to this, because there are literally questions continuing. I only posted this a few hours ago, and there are so many, and they're continuing to roll in.
Wow.
So we might have to do a part 2.
Wow. Well, I mean, we could go for a few more. Like, we could do a few more.
I'm like, keep checking, because our little like recorder is up here, so I keep checking the time. Like,
yeah, we could do a few more, and then we could probably do a part 2. And this honestly, it could even be a really good podcast episode. Like, just seeing how many questions.
Thinking it might.
I did not know there would be so many questions. So many. Then let's do a few more. But what was your question just now?
Is it embarrassing? Do you feel self-conscious?
Yeah. I think going into it, having a heart of not, this is all about me. The more your focus is on, how's this going to make me feel? And is he going to like my body? And what's he going to think about me? The more you're focused on yourself, and you go into it and you're not so focused on loving your husband, loving him and giving him pleasure and just enjoying the experience. And so I think a huge part of it is just asking God, like, Lord, give me a heart that wants to serve him, that wants to love him. And my body's not perfect. Like, I went into it like there were things for sure I'm like, oh, but I just try not to focus on that, to make that a big thing. And I know you mentioned something in the podcast that I really loved. You can maybe share that about like right before someone had recommended. Yeah, share that piece, because that was cool.
I'll let you look for the next question. Okay. There's like so many. Before I got married, I had a really great friend who had already been married for a few years, and she was like, her and her husband have a great marriage, and I really admire them. And she just spoke so positively about just like a positive view of sex for women, because so often women, it can be like, oh yeah, like, I don't know, even within the church, it can be so like, I don't know, not positive. And so I was just really admired her. So I talked with her about like how to prepare for my honeymoon and for having sex and all of that, because I was engaged. And she gave me some great advice. She was saying that for her and her husband, it was super helpful to have a conversation closer to the wedding, talking about your personal insecurities coming into marriage. And so for Dave and I, when we had that conversation, I was able to share some things about my own body that I felt like insecure about. One of those, like I shared in the podcast, cellulite, feeling like doesn't even know what cellulite is. And I'm going to think like, what is wrong with your legs? You know, like, and so when we talked about it.
Why do men not typically have cellulite?
And Dave didn't even know what cellulite was. And so I'm like trying to explain it to him. Like, it's kind of lumpy, you know.
Cottage cheese.
And he was like, he just thought that was not, like, he was like, wow, like, he just didn't even think that was a big deal at all. And so he was able to just affirm me and tell me how much he loved me and that, you know, that didn't matter. And then as, you know, there were other things that are more personal that I won't share, you know, because privacy's sake for our marriage. But there are, you know, if you have like, maybe you have an insecurity or you're like, this is like, oh, going to be hard for me. Instead of just going into marriage and feeling like, okay, now I'm going to, you know, be super insecure or really awkward, or like, I'm not going to even want to do certain things because I just like, don't look over here, you know, have those conversations in an appropriate, healthy, God-honoring way, you know, have mentors in your life who can kind of guide that process, but have that conversation so that you can be sensitive and love one another and affirm one another and encourage one another when you know, move into your honeymoon and marriage and beyond, just knowing that for your spouse or them to you, that's kind of a sensitive issue to you and they can be more affirming of that. So that's something I would recommend every engaged couple, that conversation, to have a conversation about insecurities before you go on the honeymoon.
Yeah, and this girl along those same lines, and I know a lot of you asked that, how do I get rid of the fear that my future husband will not be attracted to my naked body?
Good question.
So like, if you've never been naked in front of someone, which was my story, which was your story, and it sounds like maybe you're wondering the same thing. How do I get rid of the fear that my future husband will not be attracted to my naked body? So like, as you were talking, I was scrolling, but anything you would add in addition to someone who's right now, like they're not married, but they're like, oh, I feel so scared.
I mean, I do think that we as women are so much more critical about our bodies. You know, to be totally honest, it's like I got married and then I got pregnant like 7 months later. And then my body from that point on changed so drastically, you know, and then I was 9 months and had like this massive belly. And then afterwards, it's like my body, I had so much tearing and my body, you know, it's like you're nursing. And so now you have TMI, bleeding nipples, and you're just like, you look different, you know, it's like you look different. And so you know, if you it's like, one, I have to remember that like intimacy is so much more than like just the way that we look. It's like a relationship and an experience, and loving the other person when we're looking our best and when we're not looking our best. You know, marriage isn't all about like this Hollywood picture. And I think something that helps is to stop comparing yourself to these perfect airbrush pictures online. Like, take care of yourself, eat healthy, work out, exercise. Don't just like be a slob, you know, like take care of yourself. Your body's a temple of the Holy Spirit, you know, take care of yourself. But then remember, like, you truly, like, guys and girls are so different. And often the way that we view ourselves is so different than the way like our husband views us. And I know I'll feel like super insecure about something. And my husband, he's like, I don't even care. You know, like a husband would probably prefer to have a woman who's super excited about like sex than a woman who's like, no, don't look at me. Like, I'm so insecure. Like, you know, they just be excited and be like, you know, like just a little bit more bold in the bedroom. And I think that you're going to probably have a pretty happy husband, you know, but if you're like timid and insecure, it just kind of makes the whole process worse. So my encouragement to Christian wives would be like, get some boldness, get some spice, honey. Like, you're probably going to have a happy husband if you do. So
that's so great.
That is like a lot of random stuff, but there's just so much to say
There's
about
so
that
much.
question.
Okay.
I can't go on.
Okay, someone else asked, is it embarrassing? Do you feel self-conscious? And, you know, like anything you've never done, I think there is, like we said earlier, an element of like, oh, like you might feel a little self-conscious, like you've never done it. But I love what you were saying about that boldness. I think you making it as exciting and passionate and not just being like, oh, well, the man needs to initiate everything and pursue everything. Like, when it comes to sexual intimacy within marriage, there is so much fun that you can both have in pursuing one another. So not just always waiting for him to take the lead and not being like, oh, I'm like kind of embarrassed. But like you said, just be a little more confident. And even if you're like, I'm kind of scared, like to put this thing on or do something, like just do it scared. And, you know, as the more that you pursue your husband sexually and focus on just like, how can I make this so fun and so enjoyable? I think you'll focus less on like, oh, is it embarrassing? Is it awkward? Am I going to feel self-conscious? Just the more that you have fun with it and go for it and try new things, I think you'll find like, wow, there can be so much excitement, and you're focused less on like, oh, how self-conscious am I?
Yeah. And really that's like a mental preparation. And this is a good place to end. I'm like trying to end it because we have our days, like
Land
our
the
work days
plane.
coming to a close and we have more
But
to
we do need to have another conversation.
We need to have another conversation. So I got married 2.5 years ago, and this helped me so much. As I was approaching the honeymoon, I kind of and I described this in our podcast, I started ramping up. So mentally and emotionally, I started preparing just with the books I read, the things I listened to, all from like a good Christian perspective, but just even emotionally, mentally, I started ramping up and preparing for the honeymoon. And I remember I started mentally thinking, okay, I feel awkward or embarrassed, but how can I love my husband and how can I make him feel really good? And I thought, well, if I do these things, he'll love that, So instead of focusing on how I felt, I started focusing on how can I love him?
I hope he doesn't see my cellulite. Oh, forget about thinking about that. Let me just focus on how can I make this awesome?
And I am telling you, for someone who grew up, never had sex, got married at 30, then that was the first time, I had so much confidence and excitement and pursuing and, I think me and my husband would both agree, we've had a really great intimate sex
Should
life.
we bring him in to verify that?
He wouldn't like that. But, and he'll often tell me, I feel like I got so lucky,
Aww,
and it's not because, I'm just, really great. I don't know what I'm doing half the time, But it's because I think the mental preparation really fueled my emotions. And then as I mentally prepared and thought, wow, he would love this. Or how can I serve him? How can I love him? Then emotionally, I was able to feel that because, it's our thoughts directly fuel our emotions. So if you're sitting there thinking, this is scary, this is going to be awkward, this is going to be terrible, you're going to be
yes.
I love you, husband, But if you're okay, wow, this is going to be awesome. Think how excited he'll be when he sees me in this, or if I pursue him, or wow, it's then you start to get excited about it. So I really encourage you to take your thoughts captive and to direct them in a good direction, and your emotions really will follow if you do that.
Yeah. Y'all, this has been so fun.
This has been a conversation.
This has been a conversation like none other, but we want to continue this conversation with you. And, honestly, drop more questions. If we did not address your question, drop it in the comments over on Instagram at Girl Defined. That's where we're going to continue talking about this. We want to hear, what other questions do you have? What other questions did we not answer that you feel too embarrassed? Maybe you're feeling a little bold now and you can actually drop it in the comments where everyone can see. You can DM us as well. But I think I'm so glad we had this because it is so important for us as Christian women to talk about one of the biggest things that we experience in our life is our sexuality. And that's whether we ever get married or not. We need to have conversations about how to view this biblically on a practical level, on a physical level, and it's not going to happen unless we talk about it. So thank you for joining us for this, and we will see you over on Instagram to continue this conversation.